Welcome to Green Convene. For those of you that have not joined us before, this theme is civic engagement. We'll be talking about how to advocate for sustainability in Louisville. So I'm really excited about this one. This is brought to you by the Louisville Sustainability Council, as well as Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability through Metro Government. So we are very excited you're here. Before we get started, I want to go over the agenda and some general housekeeping. So we will do introductions to our speakers, go over some of the event logistics, and then we'll hop right into the presentation. Please, if you have any questions, you can either hang on to them or pop them in the chat box, and we will get to all questions, Q&A, and discussion at the end after the presentation. Then we'll do a brief wrap up, and I will give a couple LSC announcements. And just some basic housekeeping. This presentation will be recorded. It will primarily just be on the presentation and the speaker, but at the end during Q&A, if you want to leave your camera off just in case you don't want your face shown, that's totally okay. We will be uploading this to the LSC's YouTube channel and sending it out to all registrants post-event. So this will be recorded and you'll get a chance to kind of review if you feel like you miss anything. Please keep yourself muted. You should be muted upon entering the meeting. Please keep yourself muted. This just helps limit distractions for the speakers. During Q&A, if you would like to chime in, feel free to unmute yourself and we can discuss. But while the presentation is happening, please leave yourself on mute. And again, use the chat box to ask questions. You'll see that there's a toolbar down at the bottom of your screen, and there should be a little chat button. If you just click that, it'll open up chat. You can throw in their thoughts, links as we're talking, and of course, questions. And I will make sure that we go back through and get all of those after the presentation. I think that's it. I'm trying to keep it short and sweet so we have plenty of time, and I will kick it over to Allison.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I am Allison Smith. I'm the Assistant Director of the Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability for Louisville Metro Government. And I'm joined by members of Wild Ones, a national organization with a wonderful Louisville chapter, Margaret Carrero, also Professor Emeritus in Biology at U of L, and Barbara Berman. So we are here tonight to learn about how the weeds ordinance was updated. We're going to tell a very specific kind of case story about the work that I did with advocates and Metro Council, but there's wide applicability to other issues in Louisville. So we want this to kind of be a case study. And again, as Julia said, please put any questions in the chat. So the story starts when I was contacted by Margaret and Barbara, knowing that I work for Metro Government and do a lot of sustainability and climate change work. They have been advocating for residents and friends to think about planting things like pollinator gardens in their yard, to have more native plants as a way to attract pollinators, support our bird populations, bees, butterflies, all the wonderful things that come with these native plantings, as well as many other benefits that they can tell you about here in just a little bit. The problem came from what's called the weeds ordinance. So we have Louisville Metro Code of Ordinances. This is basically property maintenance issues. Chapter 156 talks about how yards should be maintained. And this is very old, this is from a long time ago. It basically says that any weeds or grass that are growing in a yard that are over 10 inches are to be declared a nuisance and should be cut if they are dangerous to health, safety, or the good order of the city. This was written at a time when turf grass lawns were, and they still kind of are, but they were becoming the standard. It is what people expected to see. And some of you may know that many of our neighborhoods do struggle with issues around property maintenance and overgrown yards. But the people that our advocates were talking to wanted to do native plantings in a responsible way, but they didn't want to risk being cited by our codes enforcement officers. So they came to me, they provided me with model ordinances, best practices, all kinds of research, all kinds of examples from other cities, so that I worked with our other city staff and codes and regs to see what we could do to change the ordinance in a way that would still be protective of properties and property maintenance, but would allow a little more freedom for people to feel comfortable planting native plants in their yard. So here's what we came up with. We ended up adding a section to Chapter 156 of the Louisville Metro Code of Ordinance that allows for what we decided to call a managed natural landscape, basically which says that on private land, someone can install and maintain a managed natural landscape, such as native plantings, meadow vegetation, prairie, or rain garden, as long as the following requirements are met. So like I said, I worked very closely with the codes and regs, our enforcement officers, to address any concerns that they might have, because they are the ones who are the boots on the ground, making sure that our public right of way is clear, making sure that properties are maintained. So we wanted to do this in a way that didn't make their job harder, but made it easier for them to enforce what was on the books. So here are the guidelines that we came up with and proposed. The first was the managed natural landscape has to be set back 5 feet from the property line. And this really is about access to the right of way and not blocking traffic, views for oncoming cars, getting in the way of pedestrians. This is really the main concern that codes has when it comes to things being overgrown. So we said, what we'll do is we'll provide a 5-foot setback. That way, when plants fall over, they won't be in the right of way. Although we did allow some exceptions to that. So if you didn't want to do the 5-foot setback, you could also have an opaque fence at least 4 feet tall. The idea being that if you have a 4-foot tall fence and plants fall, they're not going to fall in the right of way. That fence will hold them up. You also don't have to have a 5-foot setback if your planting abuts a neighbor who has a similar planting, right? So if there's a native planting adjacent, you don't need that 5-foot setback. So we did, and also if it abuts an area such as a wetland, pond, lake, or stream. So we tried to think about in these different situations, what would make sense, and we have an exception to that rule. So I do want to point out that woody plants like shrubs are still allowed within 5 feet of the property line. They still have to be maintained and they can't block the right of way. And also that setback doesn't necessarily have to be turf grass. It could be mulch. It could be ground cover under 10 inches. There are a lot of different options you could do if you are trying to remove all of the grass. So this was our first guideline. The next is one addressing the messy nature of native plants. So an issue that the codes enforcement officers encounter is that when it comes winter and fall, and then even into the spring, a lot of these look a little messy. And so what we worked out was that these managed landscapes need to be trimmed back or mowed, whichever is appropriate, depends on the type of plants, at least once a year. That's good practice for the plants. It allows the habitat to be there when it's needed through the winter, but then it cuts back some of the more scraggly parts and allows those plants to grow new each year. Again, this was to address some of the concerns that we heard, and that we also felt that we would hear from some community members as well as Metro Council. So this was our second guideline. Next guideline is that it needed to be defined by an edging, a fencing, some sort of material that defines it as a planted area. Remember, we're talking about managed planting. So these are very intentional. These can be any number of materials, railroad ties, bricks, rocks, many different materials can be used. A lot of materials that are found can be used, just needs to be clearly defined. Also, if there are at least 2 feet of turf grass around that managed native planting, then you don't have to have any edging. That 2 feet of turf grass will count as an edging. Again, we tried to think to make this as simple as possible. Our next was, of course, this is one of the most important parts. The plant growth cannot extend into the public right of way. This is really an equity and accessibility issue that we struggle with in our city. Many of our sidewalks already have enough issues that we really need to try to keep those cleared and not let those plantings fall over into the right of way. So again, this was just reiterating what is clear from the rest of the ordinance changes. But again, to make people comfortable with it, we reiterate it cannot block the public right of way. Also, to make it a little easier for codes enforcement officers and maybe in dealing with neighbors, we require that a sign be posted that advises that native plants or a natural planting is there. I'm with the Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability, and I'm very fortunate to have wonderful community partners like the Soil and Water Conservation District, who not only spoke out at Metro Council meetings, wrote support letters and advocated, but also stepped up with funding to say that they would work on getting signs printed that we could then give to the community at no or low cost. We didn't want the cost of a sign to be a barrier to someone. So we're working with our community partners to do that, and also to do more education in general about native plants, about managed natural plantings, and about changes to the ordinance. Lastly, of course, doesn't need to be restated, but we did, just to be absolutely clear, noxious weeds defined by Kentucky statute are not allowed in these plantings, just as they are not allowed anywhere in your yard. So things like Canada thistle, balloon vine, blackgrass, Johnson grass, these are horrible invasives that we do not want. So even if you have a managed natural planting, it cannot include any of those. I believe there are 7 defined by Kentucky statute. And lastly, and again, this was to make sure that we were very clear. We didn't want anyone to use these changes as an excuse to not do property maintenance. So we wanted to state very clearly, managed natural landscapes do not include an unmown turf grass lawn. So you can't just let your yard grow and claim that it's a managed natural planting. That is not managed, intentional, or maintained. So we were just wanting to make everyone comfortable with that. Especially Metro Council members who deal with property maintenance issues a lot in their districts. So those are the additions that we made along with these. I'm not going to read through all of these, but these are definitions that we provided. We wanted to make sure that all of this was very clear. So one issue that our enforcement officers had was, they would talk about rain gardens and native plantings, and we didn't have those defined. There was no definition for what that was. So we added these definitions to the ordinance to be what a managed natural landscape is, what maintenance means. So maintenance is defined as keeping the planting within the defined area and free of noxious weeds. We define meadow vegetation, ornamental plants, prairie, rain garden, and of course, turf grass lawn. And I think that this is probably one of the most powerful parts of the ordinance changes, is just having clear definition for residents, for property owners, for codes, to understand what these things are so that we're speaking the same language. So those are the changes that we proposed to Metro Council, which were adopted. I'm going to turn it over to Margaret to talk about how we convinced Metro Council members and the Public Works Committee that this was a good idea to do this. So I'm going to turn it over to Margaret, and just let me know when you're ready to advance the slide.
Okay. Anyway, thanks. It's nice to see all of you here tonight. And yeah, and this, I have to say, Barbara and I worked together initially and contacted, and she'll tell you more about all the contacts, but we did start off trying to contact our own Metro Council person, which was, Cassie Armstrong, and she gave us a lot of good advice, but Barbara will tell you more about that. But eventually, after, looking at a lot of weed ordinance myself, those of you who don't know me, I am a biologist, I'm an ecologist, and I care deeply about getting native plant gardens and the ability for people to plant them, out there in terms of conserving species conservation in the city. And it was becoming very apparent through contacts we had, Jody Dahmer being one of them, that some people were getting cited for it. And we were concerned that this would be a barrier to people wanting to start native plant gardens, and also for some of these nascent young landscaping businesses who want to help people plant native plants. If they don't have clear definitions and and rules, then they don't want to get started on it. It's a barrier. But eventually, through Barbara's efforts, once Allison said, "Okay, let's contact it's time. Let's contact Metro Council people." Barbara started us off with contacting in January the Metro Council President, David James, and we got an appointment with him. So I, being a professor, I'm used to doing PowerPoints. I turned the PowerPoint into a PDF and some other information, and we sent it, emailed it to him ahead of time because we knew we couldn't share a PowerPoint on his WebEx. And so this is what you're seeing is basically a PowerPoint I turned into a PDF for him to view along with us as I talked about this. And later on, it morphed into a PowerPoint that Allison presented to the Metro Council Public Works Committee, which was the committee that was assigned to, you know, study this and think about it for voting. So this is it. And basically the top, message is right on top in red. We are here to ask for your support for the newly revised weed ordinance. Now, I used weed ordinance at the start, but later on we converted it to weeds ordinance because a lot of people thought it had to do with marijuana. So you may laugh now, it's okay, but I can't hear you. So we're now calling it the weeds ordinance, and brought out what, the downsides of the old code and how, the new code would promote the city's 2040 plan goals and provide people with greater clarity for replacing lawn with managed natural landscapes that use more native plants. Now, it doesn't have to be entirely native plants, but, incorporate more native plantings. And then, of course, well, why do this? So we went on about the benefits of managed natural landscapes using native plants for the city as a whole in terms of stormwater retention, water quality, reducing air pollutant emissions because you don't have to mow it and fertilize it as much, and providing, again, improved habitat for native wildlife, birds and pollinators, etc. You may advance it now, if you would, Allison. And then, I take pictures on my walks around my neighborhood, and here was one kind of near me, and this is the picture I took, and I used it to do a little, have a little humor in it, but also, it's not that, all lawns are terrible, but, I brought out the point that do we have to have so much of it? And, just how much turf grass there is in the USA, and that it's the largest irrigated crop in the USA, and we can't even eat it. And just how much fossil fuels it takes to maintain that perfect lawn, mowing, fertilizer, pesticides, all require fossil fuels to either do, like in mowing, or to create. I mean, fertilizer and pesticides actually use fossil fuels, oil, in their production. How frequent the watering is, how much air pollution and noise pollution it creates, water pollution, there's low biodiversity, and then linking it to our health, I think is really paramount to do. So these are the points I walked David James through. And then lastly, if you would, Allison. So making these points about at the end, how much of a win-win. And then I wanted to show photos, and I had others for David James. People have trouble visualizing what a native plant garden can look like. And Allison showed you a couple, and I had some other ones in the original presentation, and then used this one so people could visualize what a native garden could look like. Not all of them are going to look like this, but what it could look like. And so they're not visualizing what I thought most of them would, is just letting your turf grass grow, and be weedy and ugly. And I wanted to counter that assumption with some visuals. And make a point with the headliner and show, the benefits for pollinators, insects, and birds. If you would, Allison.
Margaret is too modest to say that these photos are from her beautiful backyard. So I will say that for her.
Well, thank you. Yeah, these were all taken at different times of year in my garden. And then last, and even in the winter, in terms of bird life, leaving some of these seed heads up, you can see the bird. I just pointed out the bird tracks, around the seed heads and the seeds that had fallen on the snow. and how the birds are consuming the seeds, even in winter, if you would. Allison, go ahead. You can, yeah. And finally, when we were addressing the Public Works Committee, and there were about 7 or 8 public Metro Council people on that committee, we knew that a lot of them, they have in their heads, a lot of myths. A lot of people have myths. So we said, let's just deal with it head on and bring it up. And there's some common myths and why they are myths and the science behind it. And again, emphasizing these are managed landscapes. But the myth one, that a lot of people think they attract vermin, particularly rats and things, and they don't. And I bulleted and went, and Allison went through this with Public Works Committee. And myth 2, that they're breeding grounds for mosquitoes. They are not, and provided, the evidence for that. And myth 3, that they produce allergenic pollen, and they don't. The non-native ragweed is the chief allergy culprit. So so we're dealing with both the benefits and, the presumed downsides. And then lastly, I wanted to end on, the gardens are places of beauty and can sustain our local biological heritage, and that the new ordinance allows more people, bring it back to the ordinance, to engage in this natural solution for improving our city's environment as a whole, which I expounded on, which is better air, better water, better health. And that the old ordinance provided an obstacle to people choosing to grow native plant gardens. And then I wanted to point out to the Public Works Committee that they actually can do something about this one. And several times in my dealings with people at different times, I wanted to emphasize just how much of a win-win this situation this could be for the city, its people, and for our biological heritage, and for our kids, and thank them, and thank them for listening. So in any case, that was the presentation. And again, kind of put out some images so people have some idea what that looks like, because most people, I would say, do not have an image of what we're talking about. So pictures are important. And also one other thing, although Barbara's going to talk more about advocacy, I definitely contacted different NGOs in the area who wrote letters to Metro Council and Public Works Committee on like Louisville Climate Action Network, emphasized, just how having these more natural landscapes means less mowing and fertilizer, the pollution that and linked it to climate in their letter. I contacted Louisville Audubon Society, who wrote a beautiful letter about how Audubon Society National, in fact, is, all these organizations are following the science and promoting native plant gardens, which, are a win-win situation for people, the environment, and for nature in our cities. So it was great to contact. It's a good idea to contact any other groups. I think a neighborhood association wrote a letter, someone from a neighborhood association wrote a letter, things like that. It's good because that becomes part of the public record, and it's always up there as, I don't know if we'll see it later, Allison, but the letters are all attached and all in the record, and people can view the letters at any time. So that's one thing I would say, is get buy-in from NGOs and other groups in the city to advocate. But I know Barbara can tell us more about how she went on with the advocacy portion of this.
All right. Those letters actually get attached. And so whenever you see on an agenda our bill, those letters are actually linked. The links to those letters are actually attached, so the council people can say, oh, they've got, Soil and Water and Audubon Society. They can see all the, Shelby Park Neighborhood Association.
Right.
So it is impressive and really needs to be done very, before the bill is introduced. So Margaret was mainly the writer and I was mainly the organizer of the advocacy. So I was trying to find people in each of the Metro Council districts, people that would be willing to talk with their Metro Council person, meet with them, email them. And that was a lot harder than I thought it would be, because we have a huge Facebook group of 2,200 people and very few people wanted to do that work. Even an email, they weren't, they did not sign up right away. But we did find people, and the first part that I learned from 100% Real was to do the 3-minute speeches before the full Metro Council meetings. And this is very easy to sign up to do. You just call the number that's the 574-3902. You ask to speak on, the native plant, the weeds ordinance, and 10 people are allowed to do this, 3 people on one topic, on one side of the topic, and you can speak every 5 meetings. So I definitely recommend doing that. And we started those in December, and I made sure that there were 2 people in each of those as the months went on. Then we did have at least 2 one-on-one meetings with Metro Council people. We met with Cassie Chambers Armstrong, who's Margaret and my Metro Council person. She was very helpful. When we knew about the 5-foot rule, which we were disappointed in, she very quickly said, well, you want to see what you can live with and what you can't live with. And with David James, he didn't actually get the PowerPoint that I had sent him. And I sent it twice. He said, no, I don't have it. No, I don't have it. And after the meeting was over, our Zoom meeting, he said, oh, it was in my spam box. He emailed me and said, oh, it was in my spam box. So always ask, oh, is it in your spam box, in your spam folder? So I learned, that was one thing I learned. He was the president of the Metro Council is the person that decides to which committee your proposed ordinance is going to go to. And so we thought it was going to go to planning and zoning, but he decided to give it to Public Works. So we were actually lining up people for planning and zoning, and then we sort of had to switch gears when we realized it was going to be in Public Works. If you do make a presentation at the different committee meetings, you have to be invited, and you can do a PowerPoint. When you do the Metro Council meetings, the full Metro Council meetings, you only can bring a 3x8 sign, and you can see Hart Hagen and myself when we attended where the vote took place, at the full Metro Council meeting where the vote took place. And I can answer any other questions about that if anyone has them.
Do you want to tell them how David James first responded? Kind of, it's a lesson in initial responses versus what actually happens after our presentation on the WebEx, because a lot of this was happening on Zoom because of COVID. But Barbara, that was fun.
Sure. So the meeting wasn't going, I didn't think it was going that well. One thing I was told was to make sure that you have a conversation, that you let them talk 50% of the time. And he was looking on his phone and his computer a lot of the time, but he was listening every now and then. You also want to make sure, and we did have someone from his constituency who he knew, but at one point towards the end, he goes, well, I'm not sure I would want a native plant garden next to my house, my property. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is so bad. And then And then but he was very, very gracious, and we thanked him, for meeting with us. I mean, we only had 2 people that we actually had Zoom time with, and he turned around and co-sponsored our, proposed ordinance, which just, we don't even know how that happened. So you just never know when something that you think might not turn out well, will turn out well.
Yeah, I was just stunned. He co-sponsored it? What? Yeah. Oh, and we still don't know the full story of how Ja'Cory Arthur, whom we have to really thank. He was the first sponsor of the bill. And I think it's because he heard a lot from Jody Dahmer, who we have to give a lot of credit for bringing that to his attention. Because that's how he became, yeah.
That is absolutely right, Margaret. The 3 of us had been working on this for about a year when I got a call from Councilman Arthur asking if I knew anything about the weeds ordinance. I said, well, it just so happens I have a draft of some changes you might be interested in. So he was thrilled. It was exactly what he was looking for in response to constituent concerns. Councilman Arthur did want to be here this evening and had hoped to be able to join us from an airport, but his flight got moved and he is on a plane right now. So he did ask that I share this message. Please share that in any political fight, to make sure you have a broad coalition of citizens to advocate, allies at stakeholder institutions, and of course, champions on the legislative body to help carry legislation forward. And we had a wonderful advocate in Councilman Arthur. So I wanted to kind of walk through how we got to that point. So first, it's important to know if what's holding up what you want to happen is an ordinance in Metro Code of Ordinance, if it's in the Land Development Code, if it's a policy, or if it's a state law, so that you know what it is you need to work to change. We were fortunate that this one was an ordinance that we could very easily draft an amendment to and submit to Metro Council. This information I'm about to give you is invaluable, and most people do not know this. So if you go to louisvilleky.gov, and I'm not going to argue that it's the easiest website in the world to use. However, you go to louisvilleky.gov and you go to address lookup, there where the arrow is, you can enter your address and you get this wonderful slush of information, which includes your Metro Council district and representative, your congressional district, state legislative and Senate district, your school board, your voting precinct, as well as all of your trash days, your large items set out, lots of information that I hear people looking for often. And it's all in that My Address button. So this is where you identify who your Metro Council person is. And that's really where you want to start with any advocacy. They were elected to represent their constituency. And so you want to work with your Metro Council representative. When we had Councilman Arthur to sponsor, as Margaret said, President James decided it should go to the Public Works Committee. And so these committees are established at the start of every election year. So we had a whole new committee that we were going in front of, and we didn't know at first what committee or who would be on it, because it was right around January that we started this. But this is the Public Works Committee. They meet on Tuesdays at 4. It is chaired by Councilwoman Nicole George, who is also an advocate for this, co-chaired by Stuart Benson. And then you can see other council members, Dorsey, Hollander, Piagentini, Flood, and Ackerson are assigned to this committee. So other members can attend. And in this case, Councilman Arthur showed up. He introduced the proposed changes, and then he turned it over to us to make the pitch. I have a link here where you can find a list of all the committees and the members that are on there. There is on louisvilleky.gov a Metro Council page that has all of the new district maps. Remember, we just went through a redistricting. My council district changed at the first of the year. I went from Councilman Arthur to Councilman James. So be sure and check that, because those boundaries did change due to the census and then the redistricting. So these are all outreach that you can do, things to keep in mind. Remember, always have someone from that council person's district there, because that's who they're there to represent. Lastly, if you are interested in doing native plantings, I have some wonderful opportunities coming up. The Soil and Water Conservation District Garden Swap, where you bring extra garden equipment, seeds, or plants, and you can trade those for free with other people, is going to be at Wyandotte Park on the 23rd. Idlewild has a grant program for nonprofits, schools, institutions, houses of worship, where you can apply to get a free pollinator garden that they will provide and that you put in. And then lastly, something I know Margaret is very excited about, iNaturalist. Hopefully you're familiar with the app on your phone. If you don't know what a plant or an insect is, you take a picture of it, you upload it to the app, and it helps you identify what it is. A lot of people don't know that creates a database of species that are in different locales. That is invaluable information. It's what we call citizen science. It's more than Margaret and I as biologists could ever undertake. And so there's going to be a bio blitz, if you will, coming up at the end of April. And Louisville is going to be competing with 2 other cities to see how many species we can identify in Jefferson County. So you can follow this link to learn more, download the iNaturalist app. It doesn't come with a bunch of ads, I can assure you of that. It's safe to download. And then join Wild Ones on one of their nature walks where they'll actually meet and go for a walk, and as a group, upload photos to iNaturalist. And hopefully we will have more than the other 2 Kentucky cities. So lots of opportunities for native plants, lots of excitement and momentum. I can't thank Barbara, Margaret, Jody, the Soil and Water Conservation District, Becca Truman, who spoke very eloquently, both in the 3-minute public comment and also the Public Works Committee. Such great support. And yes, all of those letters are part of the legislative record. They were uploaded with the proposed ordinance, and they do carry a lot of weight. So thank you both for all of your hard work. And anything else you want to add here at the end?
Could you add to any links here for folks, just where they can find the new ordinance? I mean, I've been posting on Wild Ones in my own, but here would be a good place. And then they could view all that, they could read the new ordinance and they could read the letters to get models for any other issue they want to bring up. I mean, that's part of this, is not just to review what happened here, which was, I think, just, everybody was kind of ready. And it was good timing, like anything else, when something works like this, it's because of cooperation, and it could have not worked, but we were ready for it to work. And it really did go over well. And also, Allison, you did mention that she probably didn't say it, but all the work she did behind the scenes, I think having someone like an Allison that you identify and can reach and talk to about some ordinance change or something else like that you want to see happen in this town, she can, if she can't do it herself, she can direct you to someone, but if you can find the right person. But what Allison did that was remarkable was go, all the behind the scenes work, getting buy-in from Metro Council, certain Metro Council members, I would think, but also from codes and regs, which has to deal with this, right? And that was critical, getting them, we had to kind of bite our tongue some about the 5-foot right of way. I mean, on the sidewalk, I have no problem. It was when they expanded it to all property boundaries, but if that's what it takes, fine, but that's what it took. And Allison was back and forth in meetings with those people, discussing all this with them. And I think that, that was absolutely critical, because when the head of I've forgotten his name, I'm sorry.
Robert Kirchdorfer is the Director of Codes and Regulations.
When he came up to speak to the Public Works Committee, you could see he had their attention, and they wanted to know how this would impact his department. And he was all for it and thought the new one was great for the win-win situation, but because of the definitions and the clarity that it gave, so that both the homeowner and the codes and regs people would know where they stood. So that was critical, I think, is having someone who will advocate, from the whatever office is the one that makes sense for your issue, who will advocate with you for any other departments that make sense to do that. So I don't know if you want to add anything about that, Allison, but that was pretty critical.
I think definitely a shout out to Robert Kirchdorfer. He did not have to do that. He went in person to that committee meeting, and he put it over the top. He really let them know that they were okay with it and that he supported it. So yes, a huge shout out to Robert.
Absolutely.
Okay,
And I will
ladies.
start dropping things in the link while we do Q&A.
Yes, I was going to kick off Q&A. We have a question from Jane. How do I get a list of native plants that are best for Kentucky?
Oh, boy. That is, you can go to some of, can I answer this? I don't know. Is that
Sure,
all right with
please.
you? You can go, there's one place that's a nursery. You don't have to buy from them if you don't want to, but if you go to Drop Seed Nursery, she has all native plants from Kentucky. Okay, so you can see what's on the list if you want to search for a particular one. Then there is, I think it's in the State Forestry Department. They have lists of natives and then also of non-natives not to plant. They have brochures. There are various things, and I've made my own little list, it's just kind of all over the place. So there's no one single place. How about Kentucky, the Native Plant Society of Kentucky, Kentucky Native Plants, going to them and seeing what they have online. I'm sure they have lists and things, and contacting them if you don't see anything. That's what I would do.
Michelle actually just dropped that link for
good.
Kentucky Native Plant Society. Thank you,
Fabulous,
Michelle. You are
fabulous.
on it. So there you
Thank
go.
you, Michelle. Yeah, I was kind of like drifting into it, but yeah, there's sort of like this different places, to go. But that's a good one. I would start there.
We have another question asking, will codes and regulations receive special training on this?
As a matter of fact, they received that training this morning from me. So I actually was invited to speak to all 45 code enforcement officers. We talked to them. I basically showed them a condensed version of this presentation, including why we wanted this to happen and why native plants are important. Fielded some really good questions, showed them some examples of what we were talking about, and hopefully made them comfortable with that. So I even left my business card and told those officers they can call or text me anytime. And I am happy to help them work through any of those issues. And of course, we'll also be providing them resources to give to people. We're going to do a trifold that explains the new ordinance so that they can hand it to people who have questions about it, as well as how to reach wild ones or soil and water conservation district groups that can, help advise on native planting. So yes, that took place this morning.
Yeah, Wild Ones expects to be part of a continuing education, offering education on all this, on native plant gardens. And Wild Ones Louisville is just one chapter. There's 66 chapters throughout, I think it's 24 or 5 states in the United States with Wild Ones. And it's been around since, I think, now Barbara may correct me, but I think since at least the 1950s. Anyway, so it's not just us, Wild Ones Louisville. It's a national organization like Louisville, like Audubon Society is. And they have tons of information online too. But the Louisville group intends to, keep our, doing some education, et cetera, through our Facebook or being contacted and through our membership. So, we're going to do tours of some native plant gardens this summer and things like that if you want to join. So.
And I'm seeing lots of great resources, groups, links in the chat box. Thank you for everyone who's popping things in there. What other questions do we have for these ladies?
If I forgot the link, please let me know, but I think I've put everything in there that I mentioned.
I'm trying to get to the chat. Oh, there it is. Okay, so I can.
I want to mention
save the chat. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to mention that you can also hear the committee meetings and the Metro Council, full Metro Council meetings online by going to, louisvilleky.gov. And it's not, I actually never saw the page that Allison went to, but the other pages I think are pretty easy to find.
interesting to watch some of them. You know, the Public Works Committee meetings and the questions, and they're all archived. So you don't have to watch live if you don't have that window of time available. You can go later and you can find it all archived, and you can watch it streaming.
You know, if you go to departments, residential, or Metro Council members, you know, it's pretty easy to navigate. It doesn't take that. It's not hard.
Looking at some of these names, I think a lot of these folks are fairly well, they know something about native plant gardens. So maybe that's partly why there aren't a lot of questions. Oh, Betsy Rue is here. Okay. Hi, Betsy. She knows a lot about, in her district, about planting trees and a lot of things. She's very active. And of course is running for Metro Council this year. I'll give her a shout out. Why not?
I'd just like to say that this ordinance change would not have happened without the advocacy, Margaret, Barbara, Jody Dahmer and Beargrass Thunder, and so many other groups in the city. Without their patience, it took a year to do it. So it takes time. So they had patience, persistence, and they were willing to compromise, which I greatly appreciate. There is no perfect policy. I have learned that in 6.5 years at Metro, but we can make the best policy that we can, and it can always be amended. So we were fortunate to have great Metro Council sponsors. Thank you to Councilman Arthur and President James, especially.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
it passed 24-0, which, you know, is almost unheard of.
Wow.
It passed unanimously out of committee and in full Metro Council.
And I was
Cool.
surprised about it passing unanimously from committee, because that first committee meeting was like, we have a couple of people at least that we're not so sure of. And then it was okay. Yeah.
I'd just like to mention a little bit about Wild Ones. You know, as Allison said, it's a national organization that advocates for native plants. And I just want to make people aware that there are cultivars of native plants, there are nativars of native plants, but a true native usually is the best selection, because the best one that you can choose, because it will be assured that it can cope with our environment and be best for the birds, butterflies, and bees.
Yeah, cultivars tend to be like the same gene, like, you know, as much as we might adore Allison Smith, you know, just to have foxglove, penstemon, Allison Smiths everywhere, you know, may not be such a good idea, you know, if the environment changes. And believe me, some nurseries, you know, like Drop Seed, Idlewild is getting theirs from Ironweed Nursery, which will be moving this fall, I found out, to Waddy. So between here and Lexington and Frankfurt, actually. And then there's Alice Fuel. So there's, and also Jody is getting into the growing native plants and maybe landscaping as well. So that's, you know, we were thinking about those businesses too, when in changing this weeds ordinance, you know, to make things clearer for them. I just noticed that Wallace asked a question. You want to, yeah, go ahead. It depends. Depends, Wallace. Go ahead, ask your question.
Well, we'll read the question.
You can read it.
You can ask, Wallace. That doesn't mean you'll get an answer, but you can ask.
Well, listen, so what I typed into the chat was, may we ask the knowledgeable presenters about things other than the weeds ordinance topic? I happen to know they are pretty expert on a variety of topics. Well, all right, here's one for you. In Lexington, the electrical utility did trimming of trees around power lines in a way that was widely described as butchery.
Yes.
And I'm sort of curious as to our presenters' thoughts on how we could avoid such a debacle here in Louisville.
So as the local government representative, I will say that that is out of my purview of local government, but I do know that there was state legislation proposed that would address that. That would require, I believe, tree cuttings to be approved, plans to be approved by the PSC, that would give some oversight to that. So I don't know where that is in the House or Senate, but I do know that there was some legislation proposed to address that very concern.
Good. I'll think of more questions, folks.
Well, you can ask them anytime in other places, Wallace. You can email me, call me, whatever, or Barbara or Allison, I'm sure. So. No questions. Okay. Well, I hope there were, I was excited when Allison organized this because we were hoping it wasn't just about the weeds ordinance, right? It was, what are the take homes about getting some policies changed in the city, and this is the route that happened with us. We didn't talk about all the, things that, there were, it wasn't easy sailing every inch of the way, but, we hope we gave you some ideas of things you have to pay attention to, and certainly contacting people in the mayor's office, and having a contact there to discuss things with, I think and as well as your Metro Council person, is a good first place to start and getting their advice. And then, what Barbara did in keeping everything going, I mean, she was a slave master when it came to me. It's like, come on, you got to do this. You got to do this week. And, I wasn't that bad. I wasn't dragging my heels every week, but she kept things in motion. I think we were kind of a good kind of combo team, I think, in the advocacy end of it. So
we didn't talk about media. Media is oftentimes a great way to help your cause along, but we decided that actually getting media involved towards the end would actually probably be more problematic than not, that people that were for lawns would come out in droves and not help with it. So media can work at certain times, definitely, but you have to make sure that what's going to happen is the outcome that you'd like.
Yeah, because we were planning some op-eds and letters to the editor, and I think one letter to the editor got written, but written at some point earlier on. But towards the end, we just said, "Hey, this is going fairly smoothly. Let's not rock the boat." So we didn't.
Well,
I just want to say one more thing. If we hadn't had Allison to help us so much, another scenario would have been, we Zoomed with Cassie Chambers Armstrong early on. She said that she would sponsor the bill if we had enough votes. And she said Marcus Winkler is really the vote counter, but we would have to do all the work of meeting with each Metro Council person, starting with the committee people and getting them on board. And that's a lot of work. And like the urban ag people, their change was in the land development code, and the planning and design people did all their work for them. They didn't have to meet with any Metro Council people. Mm-hmm. So it can be different avenues that happen, and always, things can happen along the way.
Yeah, because Barbara did contact some of those folks, and they just didn't get back to her hardly at all, if ever. I don't even know, but we thought they would take it up, and then fortuitously we brought it to Allison's attention.
So planning and design with it. Very focused on the land development code, and that wasn't where we needed to make changes. So we were fortunate that we had a different route to take.
Yes, but we didn't really know that. We kept poking, you keep like, well, maybe it's these people, because we didn't know, right? We didn't know exactly. But we would have thought though that folks in that department would have just said, no, that's not our department. We can't help you. And then we would have, kept trying other things, but they just were busy, I'm sure. And, so anyway, so some of these things are just keep poking, just keep trying if you're not sure, and ask directly who can help us with this. I think, if we were to do it again, that's what I would say. It's like, well, if you can't help us, then who would you suggest could help us, move this forward or talk to about it? So beyond your Metro Council person and someone in an office, so.
And another question, but on this line, when you met with David James, did you think to ask him about what committee he might refer it to? And I've been in a similar meeting and we didn't think to ask him, but it sounds like that might be a very good discussion.
Barbara asked him.
He was actually just appointed president that day, I think, but because in January they reorganize and they elect their president towards the end of the reorganization, a few weeks of reorganization before the first Metro Council meeting in January. But he told us definitely it would be the Public Works because he's the one that gets to decide which committee it goes to.
Yeah, we asked him, Barbara asked him outright, because we heard it could be this one, Public Works, or what was the other one? I'm sorry.
Planning and zoning.
Planning and zoning. And he said, nope, definitely going to be Public Works. And we said, okay, but we didn't start talking to those people because it was also they didn't even know who was going to be on the Public Works Committee in that time in January either. So it was kind of a flux going. We had to just be patient for a couple of weeks and let it sort out. And then we, figured things out. We had planned to meet one-on-one with more Metro Council people, but it then all of a sudden moved very quickly. So we didn't have to be on David James in a one-on-one way at that point.
Just real quickly, there was a question in the chat about the use of stems as habitat, especially over winter for different insects. And so when the cutback should be, and I believe best practice is to wait until temperatures are regularly over 50 degrees in the spring before you cut back or mow or anything like that. That leaves that habitat. Margaret, would you agree?
Yeah, well, if you do it judiciously, all right, and there isn't a whole ton of them, what I do is cut back to 2 feet from the ground in late fall for the new stems. And then in the spring, just cut them back another 6 or so inches so that it isn't stems all over the place. It's just in little pockets. So it's not a visual impediment anywhere. And then the plant grows up and over it. Okay, it's not in the 5 foot right away. So, that's fine. And like purple cone flowers. So I figure out which stems are sturdy. I cut those back to 2 feet in the fall and let them be there all the next year and into the next spring for some of the bees. Some of them use it for nesting, others just for overwintering. But, we're not talking about leaving stems all over the place either. Like a clump here and a clump there, and within, the garden, not in the 5 foot right away. So. You just don't want weedy growth growing up and being, 6 feet tall all year. So.
Do we have any more questions for this team of ladies? And if people think of questions, is there a best way to contact any of you? Whether that be email, maybe a Facebook group, what would be a best way for people to get in touch with you?
Well, for Wild Ones Louisville, if you're on Facebook, we're there as Wild Ones Louisville Group. And that's where people can, there's people post things, ask questions, we post things. You can always ask questions there. Allison, I don't know if you're contactable, but she knows how to get a hold of all the rest of us.
And I put my email and phone in the chat.
Perfect. Well, thank you.
Becca knows a lot too, right? Becca Truman.
They reach out to me, I will connect them with the right people.
There you go.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I thought this started at 8. I'll have to watch the recording.
We
Yeah.
gave you a shout out, Becca.
What was that?
We gave you a shout out.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, feel free to reach out if anyone has questions about the district. We are going to launch a cost share program for through the district for Jefferson County later this summer, and we're working on signs.
Yeah, I'd like to see what your signs look like at some point.
We'll send them out before anything's finalized, Margaret, so you can take a look.
Okay, yeah, I just, I'd be interested in buying one or whatever.
Mhm. Thanks.
If you're connected with any nonprofit or house of worship, please take advantage of that free 100 square foot or 25 square foot grant free plants opportunity that Idlewild is going to do, because that's a great deal.
Yeah, just read and it's an April 15th deadline to apply. It has to be a group, not an individual.
And Allison just put that link in the chat box, so you can
Oh,
just
thank
click
you.
that and it'll take you directly there. She works fast.
Yes, she does. I gotta save the chat for all these links. Everyone knows how to do that, right? By now in Zoom, maybe? Save chat? Then you
No.
get all the stuff saved.
No, how do you do that?
Oh, well, when you have the chat over on the right, at least on my Dell, which is a
Yeah.
PC,
Yeah.
there's way at the bottom where you can type a message,
Yeah.
right? Okay, way over to the right, you see the happy face?
Yeah.
And then 3 dots.
Yeah, okay,
Click on the 3 dots and that's the save chat.
okay,
And
thank you.
then it goes to, I think downloads or somewhere on your computer. You
Mhm.
can look for it.
Thank you.
Good
Look
tip.
under Zoom, search under Zoom in your computer. It will show all the Zoom chats.
On my computer, at least, it defaults to documents, text messages. And so you should
Oh,
start.
okay. Mine is Zoom things. I can search for it by just typing in Zoom and search the computer. It's all in this one location. Okay.
All
Wow.
right. Well, thank
Thank
you,
you.
Barbara, Margaret, Allison, not only for this presentation, but for all the hard work you put in to get this passed. This is a really cool step for our city. So thank you for
Yeah.
all that hard work.
It's a yay for people and it's a win-win for people and nature. Hooray.
Yes, you said it.
And thank you, Allison and Julia, for organizing the evening.
A couple LSC updates before we go. Again, this will be recorded. I will get it sent out to all registrants tomorrow. It will also be up on our webpage for you to access at any time. We have 2 events coming up, 2 in-person events. Woohoo! It's been so long. I'm putting the first one in the chat box now. Our first in-person green drinks in, I think, 2 years is happening on April 20th, and that's going to be at the Louisville Grow Seeds and Start sale. So very fitting for this conversation. Come out, grab a beer, get some hugs, get some seeds. We hope to see you there. And then our next Solar Over Louisville workshop is happening this Saturday. You can get more info on that. Oh, that link didn't quite come through. Let me try that one more time so you can click it. More info on that is on our webpage. You can also, well, try and copy and paste that. I'm not sure why the link isn't coming up. Louisville Metro also has more information on that on their webpage. So if you're interested about getting solar panels or just learning more about what that process might look like, if you feel like your roof could work for it, join us for one of those events. So that is going to be this upcoming Saturday. And then the next one, which will be 2 weeks from that, will be virtual. So if that's a little bit more accessible for you, there is a virtual option coming up after that. But thank you again for everyone for being here. Yes, thank you for that link, Allison. I hope you have a great Wednesday and rest of your week. And it's almost time to start planting. So thanks again, ladies, and thanks for everyone for being here.
Okay.
Thanks,
Bye, everybody.
everyone.
Thanks
Bye.
for coming.
Thank
Bye.
you.